everyone. Welcome to today's webinar, Navigating the Future, Microsoft's 2024 Vision for AI in Information Management. Very much would like to thank Microsoft, who is the underwriter of today's webinar, and appreciate their support. And certainly thank you for taking the time to join us today. Our host and MC for today, Kevin Crane, is a business and technology journalist and an internationally recognized writer and reporter on digital transformation and information management. So I'm going to turn things over to Kevin today.
Hi, Teresa. Thank you so much. It's great to be back this time for another AIM webinar, this time with our friends from Microsoft. We're here to explore Microsoft's vision for AI in information management for 2024. Now, as we bring 2023 to a close, let's briefly reflect on the latest happenings in our industry, certainly most notably the big splash that generative AI has made on information management and its effect on how organizations are discussing, planning to use, or implementing artificial intelligence technologies. Now, Microsoft has recently announced some big shifts in their approach, including Copilot and SharePoint Premium. So what's coming in 2024 from Microsoft, and how should we prepare for it? That's what we'll be discussing today, which brings us to our guest today, Chris McNulty. Chris, are you with us?
Kevin, I'm right here.
Hello,
Great to be here.
Chris. Welcome aboard. Now, Chris is a director of product marketing at Microsoft. He is responsible for content services, SharePoint, Syntex, and Project Cortex. Chris is an expert in Microsoft technology. So, Chris, welcome to the program today. Listen, folks have been very interested in Microsoft Copilot for transforming productivity in organizations. What role does it play in information and content management, especially in the AI area? AI era, and specifically Microsoft Copilot. Tell us more.
Sure. Before I answer that, I just wanted to also acknowledge, as a member of the AIM board of directors, it's thrilled to see so many members of the AIM community here with us today. Thank you for your membership. It means the world to us at AIM. So in terms of generative AI, I think we're hitting an inflection point where there's tremendous interest and expectation. Certainly coming from kind of the consumer space and the public release of ChatGPT over the past year. I think what we're seeing as we're kind of embarking on sort of year two of generative AI being available to people is, how do we make it real? How do we make it professional? How do we put it to service in ways that are going to transform interaction with information across the board? One of the things that we're very mindful of at Microsoft when we look at the top line trends for what employee expectations are, for what AI is going to mean for them, they're sky high. They are tremendously interested in how AI can help them organize and find the right information, work with their schedules, help build new content, and do things that are productivity enhancing. Some of our survey data has shown that about 74% of the information workers out there are looking for generative AI to help them with their tasks. And about 51% are afraid of the risks for generative AI to take over their entire jobs. So that's a balancing act that I think that's kind of going on across the industry, certainly at Microsoft. And it's one of the things that we want to be mindful of. Part of the reason why, we'll talk about this in a bit, but when we talk about Copilot, it really reflects our philosophy, that AI literally is alongside you. It's not something that takes over for you and does your work for you, but it's there to respond to your requests and to give you information back. And, let's keep going.
I'm curious, Chris, I think at this point, most of us are familiar with generative AI. We've certainly been aware of AI in a general sense for a number of years now. Mm-hmm. This year is the year of generative AI. I think the generative part is the most important part to keep in mind, that generative AI is generating content and generating information for us. I'm still curious and perhaps not clear on the role that generative AI has in information management. How does generative AI, how is it used in things that we're familiar with information governance and information management? How is it applied?
Yeah. So I think there's two sides to that. First, like, we think that information management as terminology is something that needs to be considered really broadly. Managing information for the sake of making sure your information is managed doesn't necessarily accomplish a business goal. I mean, I can stare at a list of files and make sure that they're staying in the right place, but it's making sure that the information in those documents, in those files, is being properly not just managed throughout its life cycle, but delivered, being able to cycle in and be used to as the foundation for building more things. That's something that's kind of been incumbent on us throughout the content services era. So when you think about generative AI, it's really accelerating that cycle of how, typically, if you think about, I know some of our audiences are PMPs. When you think about, like, there's a question in the PMI book of knowledge for people who are getting certified as project managers. What's the best way to kick off a new project? Well, the answer is find the closest possible project plan structurally from what you're trying to do and use that as the basis for moving forward, right? And so the current wave of content begets the next wave of content. Generative AI is reasoning over that content. When you think about, how consumer services, they're going out and they're scouring the public internet for information to bring in. When we look at it in a commercial sense, certainly in a Microsoft Copilot sense, the information that Copilot is acting on reflects kind of the unique set of content and transactions and experiences. All the information that goes into your content is the basis for how generative AI works, which makes it even more important to make sure that you have the right information there, that the information is correct, that it's current, that it's properly secured. People love to share all the stories about AI hallucinations, what AI can do when it doesn't actually have the right information to work on and makes it up. So what I think is really interesting is, like, the importance of many classic patterns. Even if we go back before content services to the ECM era, um, retention and records management is super important for two reasons. Again, it's more important than ever before because it makes sure that the files that are authoritative are kept. The files that are no longer authoritative can be archived or disposed of. The security principles and practices are important. The ways that people author and making sure the content is showing up in the flow of work, because visibility is paramount to helping make sure humans are part of the cycle. So all of these things, both in terms of, how information management helps make sure the content generative AI uses is correct. And then also, there's another wave of how generative AI can actually execute content management actions for you. And I'll show you that in a few minutes.
All right, very good. Well, Chris, here we are in mid-December of 2023. Um, let's look back. Before we look forward, let's look back really briefly. What observations or trends have you seen this year in content management? And what Microsoft innovations have you been most excited to bring to customers in 2023?
Yeah. So um, I would say, one for us is obviously going to be Copilot, especially Copilot and Microsoft 365, which is one of the products that my team helps support, because the potential for it to transform the ways that people um, interact with each other. We found with our early wave of customers, one of the things that Copilot can do is it can listen to a transcript of a meeting in real time and give you summaries and capture action items. Um, it leads to people being much more precise because they go back and they look at some level, they're focused. No one needs to necessarily take notes. But secondly, um, you know, generative AI doesn't like sarcasm. It doesn't like ambiguity. And so it leads to people being more focused and, more clear about, let's create an action item for this, and a little bit less of the, saying, well, that's a great idea because generative AI thinks you're approving it in that case. So that's just a taste of kind of the ways that we're seeing generative AI transform interaction. Is one of the things that excites me. The other thing that excites me is kind of the wave of content management innovations that we've brought forth over the past year. At foundational content management, M365 archive and backup, helping assure that information is being properly protected throughout its life cycle. And then with what we've done with Syntex, and as we've expanded kind of the Syntex portfolio to do more things and sort of inherit the SharePoint mantle, all of the things that we're doing for end user facing experiences with content, ways to process content with AI to make sure that it's being properly tagged and secured and generated, and ways to govern information throughout its life cycle. We're really excited about how those things drive generative AI, but also transforming everyday high scale processes across organizations.
All right, let's look forward a bit now to 2024. Chris, how should organizations prepare and manage their content in 2024, especially with respect to the implications of AI in the process, and how does Microsoft help with that?
Yeah. So one of the terms of art that people have started saying is grounding. I don't know if you've heard that one yet, but making sure that content is grounded. And if you haven't heard that, what does that mean? It basically means that content is being appropriately managed, structured, and secured throughout its life cycle so that all of these high scale AI processes, which are going to ingest that information, um, are working on the right things. And so, um, you know, I'd say if we go back if we go back 10 years, kind of as public cloud services were really starting to ramp up, there was a lot of lift and shift approaches to how organizations took their information architectures and just forklifted them into the cloud. And there were lots of days of security by obscurity, and so people just sort of assumed that um, information security wasn't as baked into those architectures. And so people, lift that information architecture up to the cloud, and the cloud, cloud power means that, well, all that stuff's going to get indexed. It's all going to be searchable. And so um, those many organizations sort of found that um, they were a little bit leery of the first wave of cloud because they've inadvertently left a number of security areas open. Hopefully many of those have been addressed, but there is no organization with absolutely 100% perfect information security. And so the first wave of what's going on this year is understanding, again, um, content feeds AI, and content needs to be secure and managed throughout its lifecycle. And whether you're using tools that are baked into the products or enhancements like Purview or SharePoint Premium, that's really important. The second thing, and this is a general pattern, I think, that's true whether you're using Microsoft tools like Copilot or not, is to remember your disciplines of change management. Turning a chat-based Gen AI tool loose for everyone everywhere all at once is not the best way to get to organizational transformation. Remember, Gen AI is basically turning every person in an organization, even an individual contributor, into a manager, because you have to learn, what to ask for, how to ask for it, and then when you get results back, you need to interpret it. You need to sort of act as your own editorial advisor, because these processes are great and they're scaled. They're not guaranteed. No one's process is going to be accurate 100% of the time. So understanding there's a very human need to be able to bring new skills forward to work with Gen AI, and to understand that Gen AI may look different in the context of a meeting versus working with a document versus working with a large data set that you're trying to get some reporting on. So those are the big trends, and you'll see them reflected in our products, I think, moving forward.
All right, Chris, I know that you do have some information for us that will help us understand the 2024 vision for AI in information management from Microsoft. But before we move on, we do have a question here from Susan. Thank you, Susan, for your question today. And I don't want to leave it because she's asking about something that you just mentioned. AI doesn't like ambiguity, and it leads to better focus. Do you think AI will drive new standards in retention, schedule design, and practices? And how so?
Um, I think it will do it implicitly, because the organizations that have better discipline for things like records management are going to have better success. They're going to have better throughput of generative AI than organizations that don't, because think about the two sides of retention. Some of it's making sure the right information is around. Some of it's around making sure the wrong information is gone. So if you have, for example, lots of older holiday lists floating around your organization, and you ask a question like, what day is Christmas this year? It may stumble around and find an old holiday list and tell you Thursday. So making sure that redundant, obsolete, and trivial content is also kind of the other side of the retention schedule, which is the disposition schedule. Organizations that have that approach, in fact, go into the generative AI era asking the right questions about, the type 1 and the type 2 issues. Are we keeping the right information, and are we disposing of the right information? They're going to have the most success in that.
All right, very good. Well, Chris, tell us more about Microsoft's 2024 vision for AI in information management. You have some recent announcements from the recent MS Ignite and ESPC conferences, so please tell us more.
Sure thing. So let's walk through it. So this has been a transformative year for our industry, as we've seen both the delivery and the expectations around AI rise sky high. I think Microsoft has certainly contributed to it with Copilot. So our announcements earlier this year, I want to also distinguish what Copilot is, and more importantly, what Copilot is not. Copilot is not ChatGPT for your enterprise. Microsoft has some very strict and secure rules for what we call the Microsoft 365 trust boundary. What does that mean? So the magic of Copilot is that we're able to bring the power of large language models through the graph. The graph is Microsoft's own AI layer that we've developed over years, and it sits alongside the partnership that we have with OpenAI. So the graph understands not just security, so it reflects the intrinsic security of your data, so that if I ask a question of you, Kevin, about a file that you have created, it's not going to give me an answer based on a file I don't have access to unless you shared that file. It also understands context. So being able to look at the semantic patterns and the sharing patterns for how people share information. Jolene from Microsoft is on the call with me. She and I have a lot of information shared. And so the signals that the graph gives are going to see content that she has published is going to be more likely to be relevant to me than from someone else in the organization. Copilot also is delivered kind of through the apps of Microsoft 365 and can be augmented by bringing outside information in. But Copilots, we've taken those security and trust guidelines very much to heart, in that we make sure that we're also showing you, like, the footnotes. If you remember your days from geometry, show your work is super important. Now, AI, as I mentioned before, loves content. And the good news for us is that SharePoint, which is the engine that powers Microsoft 365, is a fabulous home for content. It's pulling in content from traditional apps like Office and Outlook and emerging apps like Loop and Designer, all across the M365 spectrum. Over 300 million people a month are touching SharePoint in some way, shape, or form, which is leading to nearly 2 billion net new documents that are added to SharePoint on a typical workday. So lots of, AI loves content, and SharePoint is just a fantastic home for that. As we see that foundational nature of SharePoint, making sure that SharePoint is that high scale, flexible platform that our partners build on, our customers build on, that you can use out of the box to drive collaboration across your organization, share the right news and information, and deliver content to the people and applications where it's needed the most. And so looking at how that kind of is structured, and a little bit of a guide to the things we're going to talk about today, SharePoint does sit at that foundational level, and it is supported by work that we've done with backup and with archive. And it powers experiences in M365, things like Viva or Copilot. And it can be enriched with developer services, including Azure Power Platform, and our new embedded service, which we'll talk about in a minute. But we're also introducing our new SharePoint Premium offering, which sits on top of this to provide high-end content management services. So let me just adjust the sharing here so I can cue this up for you. Bear with me.
In the era of AI, the secret to getting ahead with your business is something you already have: content. Now, with SharePoint Premium, you can unleash the full potential of your AI-powered Microsoft 365 Copilot experiences. Boost productivity, keep content fresh, enable discovery, and support file collaboration. Optimize content value using AI-driven automation. And use powerful tools to manage the content lifecycle and control access. SharePoint Premium, where AI meets content management.
Apologies for having to just restart the sharing, folks. There's a limitation on Zoom that doesn't let me have my mic open during a share that includes embedded audio, but we'll be underway here in just a minute. Looks like we're great. Okay. Okay, so SharePoint Premium. We deliver value kind of in SharePoint Premium in these 3 chapters. Some is around end user experiences, around working with those high value strategic transactional documents that matter the most in your organization. Secondly, how can we use AI to help process that information in the files and documents that make up the lifeblood of your organization? And lastly, how can we make sure that information is being governed and protected throughout its life cycle? I want to walk through each of those at least at a high level. With content experiences, we are driving and have announced a whole bunch of new capabilities, including new solutions that I'll show you momentarily for working with high value documents, as well as a new externally facing document portal where you can give third parties a limited view of the information that they need to work with without bringing them all the way into your information architecture, along with solutions that we have to support multiple file types with an enriched viewer. Let's take a look at what some of that experience is like. So here, I'm in the new high value document application, in this case being delivered through Teams. And so I can see updates and activity. I can see agreements and contracts and NDAs and invoices and those things that are the lifeblood of my organization, where they are in their life cycle. I can see how they're categorized, status, where do they come from, who owns it, when was the last update. And I can also use SharePoint Premium to build new high value business documents. So let's take a look at what this means if I wanted to build a new agreement. So here, I'm going to create a new agreement and I'll build it from a template that we've used using Content Assembly. I pick what are the key details that I want to fill out. And in this case, I'm told I need to be able to add new details, and I can fill them in interactively, or I can just tap into my data sources to be able to bring the right people in from my organization, as well as who my supplier is going to be. So I can go through this and decide that I want to make a change to this. Instead of saying no ownership, I want to do shared ownership of the collateral that my supplier is going to give to me. So I can make that change and then route this to my manager for approval. And so when I send this to Mona, she's going to receive a request in email for her to take a look at the proposed agreement and review it in context. And this is another place where AI, I think, really steps up. So Mona could just approve it, but more importantly, she can see where it is in the life cycle and look for the variations that from what is a standard agreement, because AI understands what a standard statement of work looks like. It can show me what's changed and spotlight for her what the meaning of that change would be. This is something that she's fine with. And so she's going to approve that. She can add a note that'll let me know we're ready to move forward with this agreement. So the last step here is being able to get this supplier under contract, which means having them officially accept the agreement with signature. This is a place where we're going to invoke our new SharePoint e-signature capability. I can also use Adobe Acrobat or DocuSign, but here I will stitch up inside of Word here, who's going to sign for Contoso, who's going to sign for my supplier. It understands from a template where to drop those signatures in, and it will route that document for signature, but it's really only routing the request. At all times, the document is going to stay safe and secure inside of your trust boundary, inside of your tenant. So when, in this case, Carlos receives a request to sign the document, he can open it up, he can review it, he can decide to add a wet signature or a cryptographically secure signature, being able to invoke that here, and that carries it forward. We now have someone under contract. So a quick view of some of the things that we have inside of those rich content experiences with file viewers, high value solutions, and many, many, many more things to come. Appreciate the feedback on that. Okay. Building on our traditions with Microsoft Syntax, SharePoint Premium also includes capabilities to help you process content, being able to automatically classify and secure information, generate new content, being able to search for it, translate it, summarize it, add e-signatures. And one of our new capabilities that we've announced this year is autofill columns. Let me show you a little bit about how AI helps you keep your information organized. So I'm in a document library here for my product launches, and I'm going to invoke autofill to be able to add more information here. So when I say I want to add an autofill, I'm going to create a new column, and I'm going to say what type of column I'm going to create. I'm going to create a choice column and say what the options should be. This is going to be to show, is the product ready to be released? I'll decide what the options are going to be. I can add custom formatting, so I can show color codes so people know what to look at for ready, review, and not ready. And then I can use natural language to decide in each document, if we have something that's lightweight, bright, and waterproof, it's ready. If we meet 2 criteria, it needs to be review. Otherwise, it's not ready. I build that rule, I can test it, and when I create that column, AI is going to step in, read those documents, and automatically tag it the way that I want it to. And I can go add further rules. I can add rules to pull out summaries, to translate the content and add it as a custom column. In this case, I want to have a little bit more explanation as to which criteria were not met for things that require review, and it'll go in and add that for me as well. There's a little bit of how we are processing content at scale using SharePoint Premium. Building on capabilities that we've already released, like document processing and general availability. We've announced not just autofill, but translation, PII detection, a multi-label classifier to, if you have a generic document, tell you in one transaction, this is an SOW, this is a contract, this is an invoice, this is a proposal, this is an order form, making sure that top-line classification can be driven across the board, along with redaction. We talked about e-signature. We've also opened up a full API set in the graph to allow your developers to invoke these processing services from wherever they are. Okay, the next part is kind of how, for SharePoint Premium, is how information is governed throughout its life cycle. There's multiple components to this around being able to build reports to show me overshared content, to enlist the help of content owners to identify which content or which sites may be overshared and ask them to approve changes to permission. There's policy controls that I can use and AI to understand what's going on with event insights. This is a place I really wanted to focus specifically on what we are doing with Copilot. So inside of the admin center, with all of these new capabilities, you don't need to learn all of them. You can just invoke Copilot saying, I'm trying to deal with information that is overshared in my organization. So Copilot will give me some suggestions about what can I do, and it will show me where to go to find the right report. Here I can find a report on what content has been overshared. It will make suggestions, and I can say, I want you to trigger an access review for the top 10 potentially overshared sites. By able to do that, Copilot will then go in and send those emails out to people automatically on my behalf with a full report for their section of the content that they need to review, ask them to review and attest back that they have finished their review. There's plenty more things that we can do with governance, but this is just a taste of how generative AI and Copilot specifically are helping transform the ways that people are working with information. Another piece of that journey is how information comes being protected throughout its life cycle. So SharePoint Premium can help you identify content that is has gone inactive or is obsolete. It can, again, trigger reminders to site owners saying, do you still need this? It's fine if you do, but if you don't, we can decide whether we want to expire it or move it to archive. And so Microsoft 365 Archive, which we also have announced this year, deploys tiered storage to allow you to reduce the costs of information in your organization. It keeps it all inside of your trust boundary. So when you move containers, sites, and libraries, and the files inside of them into the archive tier, that cost is about 25% of the cost of M365 so-called hot storage. But it still stays in your environment. It's removed from end user views, but it is still there inside M365 with all the metadata, all the versions. You can bring it back if you need to. Admins can still run things like e-discovery, retention schedules still operate and all that content, but it's a part of the way of managing that life cycle for information that you can't delete, but you're not actively using and may not want to keep in your org forever. We also have announced M365 Backup, which I will show you. M365 Backup is designed to protect Microsoft 365. It is currently rolling out in public preview. It backs up at initially OneDrive, SharePoint, and Exchange, leveraging our backup storage. As we've seen those data volumes get so big, Kevin, the days of being able to leisurely copy a couple of files to some remote location, so if I have a disaster, I can get them back, we think are gone. When organizations are being hit with ransomware, at these scales, people need to be able to bring petabytes of data back, and they need to bring them back quickly. And so Microsoft 365 is something that we make available from both Microsoft as well as making those APIs available for a number of our partners. So, so with that, let me show you how this works from Microsoft. So in this case, I want to set up a new policy to protect information that lives in OneDrive, that lives in Exchange, and lives in SharePoint. So I will decide which sites that I want to use. I can filter it by names, by how the site was created, when the site was last modified. I can upload a list of sites. I can select from a pick list. I can choose to protect everything in my organization. That also extends to your OneDrives and to your Exchange mailboxes. Coming next year, we'll also add capabilities for Teams and the rest of M365. So we built a policy. We're protecting SharePoint sites, and those backup sets are going to be kept, are going to be taken 20 times faster than was possible before. In the event of a disaster, we can browse the available backup sets. We can decide which sites we want to restore. Do we want to restore them to the same location or to a different location? And because those backup sets are stored in a separate storage layer that lives inside of your tenant, our initial testing has shown that the recovery times are more than 20 times faster than waiting for information to come from one of those other remote locations. So here I mark where I want to restore back to the original sites, and within a relatively short time, we'll be back up and running. I can see when I put this in. This is a fairly lengthy restore of over 1,000 sites, but it'll be done in less than a day. So keeping our information protected throughout its life cycle. I also would be remiss if I didn't mention our partners who are rewriting their solutions to plug into our new storage architecture for backup. And so backup storage, which is the special sauce that powers this, is being supported currently by AvePoint, Cohesity, Commvault, Rubrik, Veeam, Veritas, and more to come. The last thing I just wanted to talk about our announcements is SharePoint Embedded. Now, this is a developer architecture, and it may not be of direct interest to many of you. But if you think about how many applications there are in the world, people build custom applications or buy custom applications, and each of them has their own content storage. This leads to fragmentation. It makes management a real challenge. And it can also add to additional costs because you're buying dedicated repositories just to support a single application. So the approach we're taking is bringing all this information together on a single platform, allowing you to application developers to set up a partition that lives inside M365. So this is not, there's no front end on top of this, but it allows the same rules you have for retention, e-discovery, and more to be extended into those applications. So SharePoint Embedded sits on top of the cloud with our security and compliance offerings, and it's being used to build custom applications for our software vendors as well as corporate clients, along with being a repository for emerging M365 applications like Designer and like Loop. What SharePoint Embedded means is you take it, you're able as a developer to build on top of the intrinsic trust, security, and compliance of M365, being able to invoke those content enhancement experiences like e-signature, like document processing, being able to rely on things like sharing, versioning, co-authoring, all of those management capabilities for your content, including being able to light that content up inside of generative AI experiences, are there for applications that are built on top of our embedded stack. And it is not intended for you to use embedded to build an app that lives inside Teams or lives inside SharePoint. You can take those application shapes wherever you need to be. You're not constrained by the UX, so you can bring that app however you need to be. So just wanted to just talk a little bit about some of the customers that that have had some initial success here. So one is KPMG, who's been a longstanding Microsoft customer, who's using capabilities across the board with SharePoint Premium and SharePoint Embedded to help them drive the next generation of solutions. So let's take a look at that. Again, bear with me while I adjust Zoom.
KPMG is a multidisciplinary professional services firm supporting our clients with audit, consulting, deals, and tax advice. In my particular area of the business, in tax, we regard our business as being about three things: clients, people, and content. We want to eliminate as much as possible of the manual processing and research tasks, and that's why AI document automation is absolutely critical in freeing our people up to provide that advisory skill. With the content that we generate within KPMG, applying metadata and enriching that content to enable it to be navigable by our users, but also by AI, has historically been a massive challenge for us. SharePoint Premium is enabling us to automate that process, which really allows us to get the most out of our content and the most out of the power of generative AI. The average tax professional is drowning in different sources of information and a huge wealth of content that they could use to rely on in their work. Viva Topics and Power Automate are helping us to build a content pipeline that means without any proactivity required on the part of our users, we can serve them the right content at the right time with the right metadata to make it useful for the specific client problem they're trying to solve. We're going to be having Microsoft technology through the entirety of our business cycle, so it's not exaggerating to say that Microsoft will be foundational to everything we do as tax professionals at KPMG.
Okay, so a quick tour of some of the content management work we've been doing this year at Microsoft. Hopefully, Kevin, can you hear me?
We can hear you.
I can indeed, Chris. Thank you so much, Chris. That is Chris McNulty from Microsoft. Chris, of course, is the Director of Product Marketing at Microsoft, responsible for content services and SharePoint and Syntex and Cortex. And we've been here talking about Microsoft's vision for 2024 with AI and information management.
Yep.
And Chris, we do have some questions coming in from our audience today. In the time that we have left, let's try to get to as many of those as that we can.
Fantastic.
One coming in from Betsy is asking, what is included with the PII detector, and does it include anything that is considered PHI as well?
So, great question. So the detector technology will roll out in basically 3 waves throughout next year. The first is just helping you tag any document that potentially contains PII. The second wave of it will flag where it is in the document. And the third will add a layer of redaction to it, if optionally, if you want to redact the PII. So PHI is coming from the same system. We haven't committed a roadmap on that. Being able to also look for PHI alongside of that will trail by about 6 months there.
All right, very good. Another question here coming in from Sean. Thank you, Sean. Sean asks, is Copilot smart enough to identify probable site owners for sites where there is no owner, recommend an individual based on activity, files uploaded, and so forth? So is Copilot smart enough to identify site owners?
Copilot is not, but that is work that we're doing kind of within SharePoint Premium to identify, you know, sites that may have been abandoned. And the fact that the owners of the site have left the building is usually a good clue. And being able to, it's one of the pieces of work that we're doing is to be able to establish a governance policy, not just for taking sites that have gone inactive, but being able to step in and say, hey, you no longer have an owner, but you look like you might be a stakeholder on this. That's a place, to be honest, where in our experience with customers, we don't want to rely too much on AI, because if a content owner, if a site owner is no longer with the organization, AI may propose someone as a site owner, but someone should go in and affirmatively state that, like, yes, it is okay for me to add Kevin as the owner of this site. Someone needs to review that. If AI is just automatically promoting people to get additional security, that doesn't seem very secure to us.
All right, very good. And folks, if you have a question for Chris, now would be the time to get it in while we have time remaining. Please pop it into the Q&A feature. We'll try to get to it here in a moment.
Yep.
Chris, this next question coming in from Brandon. Brandon is asking, would content in Microsoft 365 Archive come up in Copilot for M365 results?
Yeah, great question. The answer is today, no. So when we move content to archive, it gets removed from the scope of user-facing endpoints. That includes search and includes Copilot. There are some customer requests for us to create sort of a middle tier where the content is still frozen, as it were, from end user editability, but it is still there to reason over for AI. So we're looking at customer signals and pricing on that. No details to share yet, but we like the way you're thinking on that.
All right, very good. And this question coming in from Ed. Ed is asking, is there a timeline for the availability of Copilot in the Office apps for partners and customers on a per user basis, which fits small and medium-sized businesses, rather than a 300-seat minimum?
Yeah, we're taking a little bit of context for those of you who aren't familiar. Right now, Copilot has a 300-seat minimum. We're doing this in part to kind of stage the rollout. Copilot demand is super high, and we are, to be honest, trying to focus our initial rollouts on organizations who by their size are much more likely to have hands-on Microsoft support staff engage with them, because we want those first experiences to be good. Now, the good news is those first experiences for where we're rolling them out are good. And so we are taking a look at that. I don't have a timeline that I can share on this call today, but you can expect an update on that early in the new year.
All right, very good. We are here with Chris McNulty from Microsoft. And Chris, we're almost out of time, but before I let you go, one last question from our audience today. This one from Sarah. Thank you, Sarah, and thank you, everyone. Sarah asks, if your M365 governance policies aren't completely set up to begin with, should that be done prior to starting a Copilot implementation for users to ensure content quality?
I think, Sarah, fantastic question. Yes, absolutely. I'll give you an example. This is just based on Microsoft's own usage. So if you look at some of the Copilot demos, Copilot is able to do things like, hey, I want you to build a PowerPoint deck based on this Word document. In the earliest stages of the code rollout at Microsoft, people who tried that got messages like, I can't do that yet, but here's how you should do it. Open up the Word document and then cut and paste elements into a PowerPoint document, and you'll have one. And people look at that and say, oh, this isn't ready. And so that first experience that people can have is so important in helping them build that level of trust that they can rely on what you're doing with Copilot. That extends to the content that you're pumping into it. So absolutely. Like if you feel good about your governance policies, great. If you don't, it's much better to get those squared away before you start on something transformative to help make sure people's first experience is the best experience.
Very good. That is Chris McNulty, Product Director of Marketing at Microsoft. We've been talking about Microsoft's 2024 vision for AI in information management. Chris, thank you so much for being part of our program today. What an informative session, and thanks everyone for your questions for Chris today. At this point, I think we'll turn it back over to Teresa to help us close out today.
I'm just going to
Teresa?
add one note as we're going. Teresa, I forget if you have a slide on this, but just, again, reaching out to the AIM community. Microsoft is a big supporter of this. We love doing events like this. We are eagerly looking forward to the AIM conference next year in San Antonio. So if you didn't know about that already, please visit aim.org and learn more. We'd love to see you there.
Well, you kind of beat me to that, Chris. This is the slide about in San Antonio. Of course, I'm going to talk about our conference coming up. And as you said, San Antonio, Texas, it's the first week of April. And the website, aimconference.com, it details the agenda, the speakers, the keynotes, the pre-cons, and we are accepting registrations right now. So please check it out, and you'll be able to see and hear Chris there at the event, and as well as a number of people from his team. So I invite you to come to the AIM conference. I was looking forward to that. One of the other things I just wanted to mention as well is that AIM has recently updated our Certified Information Professional exam. And in celebration of this, through the end of this calendar year, we're offering a discount for when you purchase to take the exam. So for that, through the end of this year, we're offering a $100 discount so that the price will be $350. You have up to 1 year to take the exam from the time you purchase it. So take advantage of this $100 discount. Come January 1st, that price will be going up to $450. So I encourage you to go to aim.org/CIP, learn all about the exam. At the bottom of the page, a bunch of updated FAQs, and encourage you to be brave and become a certified information professional and purchase the exam so that you can sit and take that test. And we are at the end of our webinar time right now. And I much want to thank Microsoft for their support. Without support from our solution providers, we wouldn't be able to bring you these free educational programs.